The pendulum of the antique clock in Vanguard Dynamics' 50th floor boardroom swung with agonizing slowness. For a decade, CEO Leonard Dean had ruled this room with an iron fist and a sociopathic smile, breaking careers in half for sport. Today, 14 elite executives sat paralyzed, suffocating in a sudden, terrifying vacuum of power. At the head of the table, Dean's face was a mask of pale, breathless disbelief. At the opposite end stood a mid-level analyst, a single father in a cheap suit with absolutely nothing left to lose. He leaned forward, held Dean's gaze, and delivered the execution. "Security, remove him." The whisper shattered the empire. The neon glow of the city bled through the cheap blinds of Kurt Hudson's apartment, painting harsh, jagged lines across the kitchen table. It was 3 a.m. In the next room, the rhythmic, mechanical hum of a specialized nebulizer was the only sound keeping the crushing silence at bay. That sound meant Lily was breathing. It also meant Kurt was drowning. Kurt rubbed his eyes, the grit of exhaustion scratching at his corneas. He was a senior risk analyst at Vanguard Dynamics, a man whose entire professional life was dedicated to finding anomalies in endless oceans of data. But the only data he could focus on tonight were the medical bills stacked like a fragile, terrifying fortress next to his laptop. 5 figures, then 6. His insurance, Vanguard's supposedly premium corporate plan, had systematically denied Lily's experimental treatments for her degenerative lung condition. He took a sip of cold, bitter coffee and turned back to his screen. To distract himself from the rising panic in his chest, he had logged into the company's secure server. He was supposed to be running a routine stress test on the quarterly logistics expenditures. Instead, his cursor hovered over a hidden subdirectory he had stumbled upon 3 hours ago. It was labeled simply, Projected Attrition Reserves. Kurt's fingers flew across the keyboard. He bypassed the initial firewall with a backdoor code he'd learned from a cynical IT tech named Wanda Burke months ago. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. It wasn't an expenditure report. It was a hemorrhage. Millions of dollars specifically, funds siphoned from the employee health and pension trusts, were being quietly funneled into a labyrinth of offshore shell companies. And the digital signatures authorizing the transfers belonged to the upper echelon of Vanguard's executive board. A heavy, sickening dread pooled in Kurt's stomach. He wasn't just looking at embezzlement, he was looking at the reason his daughter's claims were being denied. The company was artificially deflating the health fund to cover catastrophic losses in a botched overseas merger, paying out the executives' bonuses while low-level employees were left to rot. Kurt stood up, his chair scraping violently against the linoleum. He walked to Lily's room. She looked so small in the bed, her pale face illuminated by the green light of the medical equipment. She was 7 years old, fighting a war her own body had declared on her. Kurt had promised her, over the fresh grave of her mother 3 years ago, that he would never let anything hurt her. He looked back at the glowing laptop screen in the kitchen. He was a single father. He was entirely expendable. If he exposed this, Vanguard would crush him. They would tie him up in litigation until he was bankrupt, and Lily would lose the basic care she still had. But if he did nothing, he was complicit in the very system that was slowly killing his child. The moral compass inside him, usually pointing strictly to survival, began to spin wildly. He couldn't just download the files. That would trigger an internal alarm. He needed to be smart. He needed a physical copy. And he needed allies. But in a building where everyone was bleeding each other for the next promotion, who could he trust? He spent the next 3 hours committing the routing numbers and account names to memory, writing them down in a cryptic shorthand inside a beat-up leather notebook he kept for grocery lists. When the sun finally began to rise, casting a bruised purple light over the city skyline, Kurt closed the laptop. The lines on his face seemed to have deepened overnight. He wasn't just a father trying to survive anymore. He was a man walking into a war zone, armed with nothing but a notebook and a desperate, dangerous love for his daughter. The corporate headquarters of Vanguard Dynamics was a monument to sterile, uncompromising power. It was an ecosystem of glass, steel, and forced politeness, where smiles were weapons and silence was a threat. Kurt walked onto the 42nd floor, the risk management division, feeling the phantom weight of the leather notebook in his breast pocket. It felt like it was burning a hole through his suit. He needed to test the waters. He needed to know how deep the rot went. His immediate superior was Cynthia Shaw, the vice president of risk assessment. Cynthia was a masterclass in corporate survival. She was sharp, elegant, and possessed eyes that could read a room's weaknesses in seconds. Kurt had always respected her. She had covered for him when he needed sudden time off for Lily's hospital visits. She was the closest thing to a mentor he had. He knocked on her glass door. She waved him in without looking up from her monitors. "Kurt, you look like you haven't slept since Thursday," she said, her tone a smooth blend of observation and faint concern. "Lily had a rough night," Kurt lied smoothly. "Cynthia, do you have a minute? I ran into something weird on the Q3 logistics stress test." Cynthia paused, her fingers hovering over her keyboard. She looked up. "Define weird." Kurt sat down, leaning forward. "There are massive discrepancies in the employee benefit ledger. Specifically, the health reserves. It looks like a bleed. A deliberate one. Funds are being routed to an unlisted subsidiary in the Caymans." For a fraction of a second, a micro-expression so brief Kurt almost missed it, Cynthia's jaw tightened. The easy, mentoring warmth vanished from her eyes, replaced by something cold and calculating. "Kurt," she said softly, her voice dropping an octave. "Logistics stress tests don't touch the health reserves. Why were you looking there?" "I was running a comprehensive cross-reference to ensure our liquidity wasn't—" "Stop," Cynthia raised a hand. She stood up, walked to the glass door, and pulled down the privacy blinds. The sudden isolation made the room feel like an interrogation cell. She turned back to him, leaning against her desk. "Do you know what the primary rule of a sinking ship is, Kurt?" Kurt swallowed hard. "Don't panic?" "No," Cynthia replied, her voice eerily calm. "It's that you don't point out the hole to the captain unless you already have a lifeboat. Leonard Dean does not like holes being pointed out. Cynthia, they are draining the fund. My daughter's treatments—" "Your daughter's treatments are a tragedy, Kurt. But they are a personal tragedy. What you are poking your nose into is a corporate strategy." She sighed, crossing her arms. "I'm going to do you the biggest favor anyone in this building will ever do for you. I'm going to pretend this conversation never happened. You are going to go back to your desk. You are going to delete whatever you think you saw, and you are going to focus on your actual job. If you don't—" She let the sentence hang in the air, thick and suffocating. Kurt stared at her. The betrayal tasted like ash in his mouth. She knew. She wasn't just aware of the embezzlement, she was part of the machine protecting it. The realization hit him with physical force. He was entirely alone. "Understood," Kurt said softly. He stood up, smoothing his tie, his face an impenetrable mask. "Just a glitch in the matrix. I'll clear it from my cache." He walked out of her office, feeling her eyes burning into his back. He knew he had made a fatal mistake. He had shown his hand to the dealer. By 2 p.m. that afternoon, Kurt noticed that his access to the Q3 logistics files had been quietly revoked. By 4 p.m., an unmarked, encrypted email appeared in his inbox. It was from Leonard Dean's executive assistant. "The CEO requests your presence in his office. 5 p.m., come alone." Kurt looked down at his shaking hands. The trap had been set, and he had walked right into it. The 50th floor was a different world. The air smelled of ozone, imported leather, and absolute authority. Leonard Dean's office occupied the entire southern corner, offering a panoramic view of the city that made the cars below look like insignificant insects. Leonard was standing by the window when Kurt entered, a crystal tumbler of scotch in his hand. Leonard Dean was a man carved from granite and ambition. He didn't manage, he conquered. When he turned to face Kurt, his smile was blinding, weaponized charm. "Kurt, come in, sit down." "Drink?" Leonard offered, gesturing to a leather armchair. "No, thank you, sir. I have to drive my daughter to physical therapy later," Kurt said, taking a seat. He kept his posture rigid, his breathing shallow. Leonard sighed, taking a slow sip of his drink. "Ah, yes. Lily. A beautiful girl. I was reviewing her file this morning. It's a heartbreaking situation, Kurt. Truly. The way the insurance division handled her claims, it's unacceptable. I had a very stern word with them today." Kurt's blood ran cold. Leonard wasn't just aware of his snooping. He had weaponized Kurt's personal life within hours. "I appreciate that, Mr. Dean," Kurt managed to say. Leonard walked over and sat on the edge of his massive desk, towering over Kurt. "Let's be honest with each other, Kurt. You're a smart guy. too smart for a mid-level analyst role. You see things other people don't. You see the complexities of keeping a machine this massive operational. I see numbers, sir, Kurt said carefully. And sometimes they don't add up. Leonard chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Numbers always add up, Kurt. It just depends on what equation you're using. Right now, Vanguard is in a transitional phase. We are moving assets to ensure the long-term survival of this company. Sometimes, short-term sacrifices are necessary for the greater good. Sacrificing the employees' health fund? Kurt asked, the anger finally bleeding through his disciplined facade. Leonard's smile vanished. His eyes went flat and shark-like. I am offering you a choice, Kurt. A very rare choice. I can see the burden you carry. I want to lift it. Leonard picked up a manila folder from his desk and tossed it onto Kurt's lap. Kurt opened it. Inside was a promotion contract. Senior Director of Logistics. A base salary triple his current pay, and attached to it was a fully funded, specialized medical trust in Lily's name. It was enough to send her to the best specialists in the world. It was salvation. Sign that, Leonard whispered, his voice smooth as silk. And your daughter's future is secured. All of her pain, all of your sleepless nights, gone. In exchange, you become my right hand in risk management. You ensure the numbers continue to add up correctly. You forget whatever fairy tales you thought you saw in the Q3 ledger. Kurt stared at the contract. The paper felt heavy, radiating a toxic kind of heat. It was everything he had prayed for. All he had to do was sell his soul. He thought of Lily, her struggling breaths. Then he thought of the thousands of other employees, people with their own families, their own sick children who would be destroyed when the pension fund inevitably collapsed. Leonard was watching him, a look of smug certainty on his face. He believed every man had a price. Kurt slowly closed the folder. He looked up, meeting Leonard's predatory gaze. He had to play this perfectly. If he refused outright, he wouldn't make it to the elevator with his job intact. This is incredibly generous, Mr. Dean, Kurt said, his voice trembling. Partly an act, partly genuine terror. I need to read the fine print to make sure the medical trust covers international treatments. Leonard's smile returned, triumphant and condescending. Of course, Kurt. Take it home. Read it to your daughter. Bring it back signed by tomorrow noon. Kurt stood up, clutching the folder. He walked out of the office, his legs feeling like lead. He had bought himself 18 hours. 18 hours to take down a titan or lose everything. Kurt didn't go home. He drove his sedan through a labyrinth of back streets, convinced a black SUV was tailing him, until he reached a dimly lit, grease-stained diner 3 towns over. It was a place where Vanguard executives wouldn't be caught dead, reeking of stale fry oil and cheap coffee. He sat in a corner booth facing the door, nursing a cold mug, his leg bouncing with manic energy. At 9:15 p.m., a figure in an oversized hoodie slipped through the diner doors. Wanda Burke slid into the booth opposite him, keeping her hood up. She was a ghost in the Vanguard machine, a senior network administrator who harbored a deep, cynical hatred for corporate greed. Kurt had once helped her avoid termination over a minor policy infraction. She owed him, but even debts had limits. You're radioactive, Hudson, Wanda whispered, not looking at him. She pretended to study the laminated menu, her eyes darting toward the street outside. Internal security flagged your entire digital footprint the second you walked out of Dean's office. Your keycard is bricked. Whatever hornet's nest you kicked, the whole swarm is out. I need the offshore routing data, Wanda. I need the hard proof connecting Leonard Dean and the board to the Cayman accounts, Kurt said, sliding a burner flash drive across the sticky table. Wanda scoffed, pushing the drive back with a napkin. Are you suicidal or just stupid? They wiped the primary server an hour after you left Shaw's office. It's gone. Scrubbed so clean, you could eat off the hard drive. Kurt felt the diner tilt around him. It can't be gone. There has to be a shadow backup, a redundant server. You know the architecture better than anyone. Only if you have physical access to the mainframe on the sub-basement level, Wanda hissed, which is currently guarded by 2 men who look like they eat raw meat for breakfast. It's over, Kurt. Before Kurt could argue, his phone buzzed violently against the table. He froze. He had 3 missed calls from human resources and 1 text message from an unknown number. It was an encrypted PDF file. His thumb hovered over the screen, trembling. He opened it. It was a fabricated ledger. Line by line, it showed a masterfully constructed trail of embezzled funds, $4 million in total, bleeding directly from the Vanguard Logistics Department into a private offshore account. The account holder's name was printed in bold at the top, Curtis Hudson. They hadn't just fired him. They had built an airtight cage around him. "Wanda," Kurt said, his voice suddenly hollow, devoid of oxygen. "Look at this." Wanda leaned over, her eyes scanning the glowing screen. The color drained from her face. She cursed under her breath, a venomous string of words. "Dean is burning you to the ground to cover his tracks. He's making you the fall guy for the missing pension money. By tomorrow morning, the feds will be at your door with a battering ram. You won't just lose your job. You'll do 20 years in federal lockup." Kurt couldn't breathe. The walls of the diner seemed to close in. He thought of Lily. Lily waking up to police sirens. Lily being handed over to a caseworker. Lily in the foster system, without her specialized treatments, gasping for air in a stranger's house. The thought snapped something fundamental inside him. The terror that had been paralyzing him evaporated, replaced instantly by a cold, crystalline, absolute fury. The moral dilemma of doing the right thing was dead. This was no longer corporate espionage. This was a father fighting a street war for his daughter's life. "I need to get into the sub-basement," Kurt said, his voice eerily calm, stripping away any trace of the mild-mannered analyst. "I just told you I can't get you in." "Security will break your legs before you reach the elevator," Wanda replied, her eyes wide with alarm. "Take your kid and run, Kurt. Drive to Canada." "No," Kurt said, his eyes burning with a desperate, calculating light. "Dean thinks I'm a cornered rat. He expects me to run, or to beg him for mercy tomorrow morning with that signed contract. He thinks he owns the board, but he forgot one crucial detail." "What detail?" "I read the quarterly prospectus. I know how the ownership algorithm works," Kurt said, tapping his leather notebook. "Dean controls the board, but he doesn't own Vanguard." "Who owns the majority of Vanguard's voting shares, Wanda? Who holds 51%? Wanda frowned, her tech brain whirring. "It's a holding company, M Corp. But they're a ghost, a silent partner. They never intervene in day-to-day operations. The CEO of M Corp is a recluse. Miles Carson. He hasn't been seen in public or attended a board meeting in 5 years. Find him," Kurt commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Find me a home address, a private server IP, a country club, anything. I don't need to break into Vanguard's mainframe. I need to bypass Leonard entirely and go to the owner. I have the Cayman account numbers in my head. I have the dates. If Carson is half the ruthless businessman Dean is, he'll know how to verify my claims independently." Wanda stared at him, realizing the sheer, suicidal audacity of his plan. She looked at the terrified but resolute father sitting across from her. Slowly, she unzipped her backpack and pulled out a battered, sticker-covered laptop. "You're completely insane, Hudson," she muttered, her fingers already flying across the keyboard, bringing up a terminal window filled with scrolling green code. "But I hate Leonard Dean a hell of a lot more than I love my job. Give me 20 minutes and a refill on this terrible coffee." The rain was coming down in violent, horizontal sheets, hammering against the windshield of Kurt's sedan as he navigated the treacherous, winding roads high above the city limits. Wanda had delivered, but barely. It took hacking through 3 layers of a private military security firm's routing data to find the estate where Miles Carson actually resided. It wasn't listed on any map. Kurt pulled up to a set of massive, unyielding wrought iron gates flanked by stone pillars. There was no intercom, no guard shack, just a single, blinking red eye of a high-definition security camera staring down at him through the downpour. He killed the engine and stepped out into the storm. The icy rain instantly soaked through his cheap suit, chilling him to the bone. But he didn't flinch. In one hand, he held the manila folder containing Leonard Dean's blood money contract. In the other, his beat-up leather notebook. He walked straight up to the camera. He didn't wave or shout. He simply opened the notebook to the pages filled with his frantic, shorthand scribbles of the offshore routing numbers and pressed it as close to the lens as he could without blurring the focus. He stood there for 10 agonizing minutes, shivering violently, the water plastering his hair to his forehead. He knew Carson was eccentric, highly paranoid, and obsessed with raw data. He was banking on Carson's curiosity, outweighing his desire for privacy. Finally, a heavy, metallic clank echoed through the storm. The iron gates slowly groaned open. Kurt walked up the long, winding driveway toward a brutalist concrete mansion that looked more like a fortress than a home. Before he even reached the heavy oak front doors, they opened. A massive man in a tailored dark suit stepped out, wordlessly frisked Kurt with professional efficiency, confiscated his soaked phone, and gestured for him to enter. Kurt was escorted through a cavernous, dimly lit hallway that smelled of expensive wood polish and ozone. The house was dead quiet, save for the hum of what sounded like industrial server racks hidden behind the walls. He was led into a massive library. Sitting in a high-backed leather chair by a roaring, crackling fireplace was Miles Carson. He looked nothing like a billionaire holding company CEO. He wore a simple, slightly frayed gray sweater. His graying hair was unruly, and his eyes, pale, sharp, and entirely devoid of warmth, were locked onto a tablet in his lap. "You have exactly 3 minutes to explain why a terminated, soon-to-be indicted Vanguard analyst is standing on my Persian rug dripping rainwater," Carson said, his voice a raspy, quiet monotone that commanded absolute attention. Kurt didn't apologize. He walked forward, water pooling at his feet, and dropped the manila folder and his notebook onto the glass coffee table between them. "Because Leonard Dean is stealing your company out from under you," Kurt said, his voice remarkably steady, "and he's using me as the scapegoat to wash the money clean." Carson didn't even glance at the files. He kept his piercing eyes on Kurt. "Dean's internal security team claims you embezzled $4 million. They sent the digital trail to my private server an hour ago. The routing is incredibly convincing. Why should I believe a desperate man over my own appointed CEO?" "Because it's a fabrication designed to blind you," Kurt countered. "Look at the dates in my notebook. Look at the specific Cayman routing numbers. Then cross-reference them with the dates Vanguard supposedly took massive losses in the European merger last quarter. Dean didn't lose that money to market volatility. He hid it. And right now, he's padding his fabricated losses by illegally draining Vanguard's employee health and pension trusts." Carson finally set his tablet down. He reached forward and picked up the damp leather notebook. He spent a moment studying Kurt's messy handwriting, then picked up his tablet again. He began typing sequences of numbers. For 5 full minutes, the library was suffocatingly silent. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire, the drumming rain against the reinforced glass windows, and the soft tap-tap-tap of Carson's fingers. Kurt's heart pounded violently against his ribs. This was it. If Carson dismissed him, Kurt would be arrested by dawn. Carson stopped typing. He picked up his desk phone, pressed a single button, and spoke into the receiver. "Isolate the Cayman IP clusters from Dean's executive suite over the last 90 days. Run it against the employee trust outlays." "Yes, I'll hold." Another minute passed. Carson's eyes narrowed as he listened to the voice on the other end of the line. "I see," he murmured. He hung up the phone. Carson looked up, his expression unreadable, calculating. "The money is moving precisely where you said it is. Dean has structured it brilliantly. He layered the theft under 3 shell companies. It would have taken my auditors a year to find this, by which time the funds would have vanished entirely. Dean offered me a promotion and a medical trust for my sick daughter to stay quiet," Kurt said, pointing a shaking finger at the manila folder. "He offered to save her life. But if he succeeds tomorrow morning, thousands of employees lose their safety nets. The pension fund collapses, and the company implodes within 3 years." Carson leaned back, lacing his fingers together, studying Kurt like a fascinating, tragic anomaly. "Let me understand this. You walked away from your daughter's salvation, from absolute financial security, to do the right thing? Are you a fool, Mr. Hudson? Or do you just possess a martyr complex?" "I'm a father," Kurt said, his voice cracking slightly, the exhaustion finally seeping through. "And I refused to look my daughter in the eyes and know her life was bought with the destruction of innocent people. But I am out of options. Dean controls the board. He's going to finalize the European merger tomorrow at 9 a.m., which will legally wash the stolen funds clean. I need your help. I need you to stop him." Carson stood up slowly, walking over to an antique globe that doubled as a wet bar. He poured 2 glasses of amber bourbon, walked back, and handed one to Kurt. "Let's be clear, Kurt. I do not care about the employee's health fund. I care about my investment," Carson said coldly, taking a sip. "Leonard Dean has proven to be a liability, a thief in my house. But confronting a CEO who controls the board requires a scalpel, not a hammer. If I go to the authorities now, Vanguard's stock plummets and I lose billions." Carson walked to a heavy iron safe built into the wall, spun the dial, and pulled out a thick embossed envelope sealed with red wax. He walked back and pressed it hard into Kurt's chest. "I despise board meetings. I find them tedious," Carson whispered, a terrifying, predatory smile finally breaking across his face. "But tomorrow morning, M Corp is going to exercise its legal right as the majority shareholder for the first time in half a decade. And you, Kurt Hudson, are going to be my proxy." Kurt stared at the envelope. It felt impossibly heavy. "Take this," Carson commanded. "Walk into that room tomorrow and burn Leonard Dean to the ground." The boardroom on the 50th floor was buzzing with an atmosphere of smug victory. 14 executives, including Cynthia Shaw, sat around the mahogany table. At the head stood Leonard Dean, projecting an aura of invincibility. "Ladies and gentlemen, the European merger is ready for final signatures. This will solidify Vanguard's position for the next decade," Leonard announced, his voice booming. He glanced at the empty seat near the back, the seat reserved for the M Corp representative, which had been empty for 5 years. "Let's vote and put this to bed," Cynthia Shaw said, avoiding eye contact with anyone. She looked pale, but resolute in her complicity. Just as Leonard raised his pen, the heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open. The room fell dead silent. Kurt Hudson walked in. He wasn't wearing his cheap analyst suit. He was wearing a tailored charcoal suit Carson had provided. He looked clean, composed, and utterly lethal. Leonard Dean's pen hovered in the air. For a split second, sheer panic flashed in his eyes, quickly masked by boiling rage. "What is the meaning of this?" Leonard barked, slamming his hands on the table. "Security! How did this man get up here?" "Hudson, you are trespassing. The police are already looking for you." Kurt ignored him. He walked slowly around the table, the silence in the room stretching until it felt like a taut wire about to snap. The executives stared at him, paralyzed by the sheer disruption of protocol. Kurt stopped behind the empty leather chair reserved for M Corp. He placed his hands on the back of it. "I'm not here as an employee, Leonard," Kurt said, his voice echoing off the glass walls. He tossed the embossed envelope onto the center of the table. "I am here as the legal proxy for Miles Carson and M Corp, holding 51% of Vanguard's voting shares." Cynthia Shaw gasped quietly, pressing a hand to her mouth. Leonard's face drained of color. He looked at the seal on the envelope. He knew Carson's signature. The illusion of his power fractured in an instant. "This is a bluff," Leonard hissed, his voice losing its booming confidence. "You're a disgruntled, thieving analyst." "I am the man who gave Miles Carson the Cayman routing numbers," Kurt interrupted smoothly. "I am the man who provided the metadata of you and 3 other board members authorizing the transfer of $80 million from the employee trust. M Corp's forensic team secured the shadow servers at 4 a.m. this morning." The room erupted into chaos. Executives started shouting, pushing away from the table. Cynthia Shaw buried her face in her hands, knowing her career was over. "Silence!" Leonard roared, but his voice cracked. He looked around the room, realizing that his loyal army was suddenly looking at him not as a leader, but as a contagion. He looked back at Kurt, sheer venom in his eyes. He reached under the desk, pressing the silent alarm for building security. 2 massive security guards in tactical suits burst through the boardroom doors, looking wildly around the room. "Remove him!" Leonard screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Kurt. "He is an intruder! Arrest him!" The guards took a step toward Kurt. Kurt didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. He looked at the guards, then looked directly into Leonard Dean's eyes. With the absolute, crushing authority of the majority shareholder with the power to hire, fire, and destroy anyone in that building, Kurt leaned forward. "Security, remove him." The words were whispered, but they froze the entire boardroom. The guards stopped. They looked at Kurt, then at the M Corp proxy documents on the table, then finally at Leonard Dean. The hierarchy had shifted in a heartbeat. The guards walked past Kurt, flanking Leonard Dean on both sides. "Sir, we need you to step away from the desk," one of the guards said, placing a heavy hand on Leonard's shoulder. Leonard Dean looked like he was suffocating. He looked at his board members, begging for support, but they all averted their eyes. He had ruled by fear, and now that fear was directed entirely at Kurt Hudson. As the guards physically pulled Leonard from his chair and escorted him out of his own boardroom, his legacy crumbling to ash, Kurt took a deep breath. He looked out the window at the sprawling city. He had walked into the fire and survived. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick text to Lily's babysitter. "Tell her I'm coming home, and tell her we're going to the best doctor in the world tomorrow." Kurt sat down in the CEO's chair. The reckoning was over. The healing could begin. Thank you so much for watching and listening to this story. I hope Kurt's journey resonated with you. When writing this, I really wanted to explore the terrifying reality of power imbalances. We often feel so small when facing massive systems, whether it's a corrupt corporate ladder, an unfair medical system, or just people who use fear to control others. Kurt represents the breaking point we all have, that moment when the love for our family outweighs our fear of the consequences. In real life, we might not have a billionaire secret partner to save the day, but we do have the power of integrity. Standing up for what is right, even when your voice shakes, is the ultimate form of bravery. If you enjoyed this dramatic dive into the boardroom, please like this video, share it with someone who loves a good underdog story, and subscribe to the channel for more intense, character-driven fiction. What would you have done in Kurt's shoes? Let me know in the comments below.